A policeman illegally opens a secure briefcase and receives a powerful electric shock. He had no idea that the owner of the case is the FBI director. Subscribe and write in the comments what you think about this case. The black sedan sliced through the stillness of the night, its sleek body illuminated only by the pale glow of its headlights. Inside, Michael Harper, director of the FBI, gripped the steering wheel with a steady hand, his face set in calm concentration. The road ahead stretched into infinity, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through rolling hills and darkened woods. The world outside was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like a pause before something inevitable. Harper wasn't a man who often allowed his thoughts to wander, but tonight was different. The leather seat beneath him creaked faintly as he adjusted his posture, replaying the details of the confidential briefing he'd received earlier. In the back seat, securely fastened by custom straps, sat a reinforced case containing materials critical to national security. The contents of that case weighed heavily on his mind, though his face betrayed no sign of the pressure he carried. His years of training had made him a master at concealing his thoughts behind a stoic mask. The faint hum of the car's engine filled the cabin as the faint strains of a classical symphony played softly from the speakers. Harper's fingers tapped lightly on the steering wheel, keeping time with the music. It was late, and the meeting he was headed toward couldn't wait until morning. His schedule rarely afforded moments of peace like this, moments where he could almost forget the responsibilities that loomed over him like shadows. But peace, as he had learned many times before, was fleeting. Red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror, accompanied by the sharp, piercing wail of a siren. Harper's gaze shifted instinctively, his jaw tightening. His first thought was pragmatic. It could be a routine stop, perhaps a random check. He glanced at the speedometer. He wasn't speeding. His vehicle was meticulously maintained, and he hadn't noticed any mechanical issues. Still, the sirens persisted, growing louder, more insistent. Harper sighed deeply, his grip on the wheel tightening momentarily before he signaled and guided the car to the side of the road. Gravel crunched under the tires as he brought the sedan to a halt, reaching over to lower the volume of the music. He sat still for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, his mind already racing through the protocols he would follow. From the side mirror, he watched as the police cruiser came to a stop behind him, its high beams flooding the interior of his car with harsh light. A figure emerged, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 40s, wearing the uniform of a local police officer. Even from a distance, Harper could see the sharp angles of the officer's jaw, his buzz cut gleaming under the cruiser's lights. The man carried himself with an air of authority that Harper immediately recognized as overcompensation. The officer approached the driver's side window with slow, deliberate steps, his flashlight cutting through the darkness as he inspected the vehicle. Harper rolled the window down just enough to speak, keeping his hands visible on the wheel. He knew the drill. He'd been through situations like this before, though rarely as a civilian. "Good evening, officer," Harper said evenly, his voice calm and controlled. The man leaned slightly toward the window, his flashlight aimed directly at Harper's face. "License and registration," he barked, skipping any pleasantries. His tone was clipped, laced with suspicion. Harper maintained his composure, reaching for his wallet in a deliberate, measured motion. "Of course. May I ask what the issue is?" "You were speeding," the officer replied curtly, though Harper knew it wasn't true. The man's gaze darted past Harper toward the back seat, where the case sat securely strapped in place. His lips thinned into a line. Handing over his license, Harper spoke again, his tone still even. I believe I was within the speed limit, officer, but I'll comply with any necessary checks." The officer, whose badge identified him as Sergeant Bradley Walsh, didn't bother glancing at the license immediately. Instead, his focus remained fixed on the case. "What's that?" he asked, jerking his chin toward it. Harper hesitated only briefly. "That's classified equipment. I'm on official business." Walsh finally glanced down at the license in his hand, his eyes narrowing as he read the name. He looked back at Harper, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Michael Harper," he read aloud. "And what's your business, Mr. Harper? That's a fancy car for someone driving out here in the middle of the night." "It's Director Harper," Michael corrected calmly, though he could feel the simmering irritation beneath his controlled exterior. "Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Walsh raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Director of the FBI, huh? What are you doing out here, Director Harper? Shouldn't you be in Washington or wherever it is you people work?" Harper met the man's gaze evenly. "As I said, I'm on official business. I provided my identification. If there's no further issue, I'd like to continue my journey." But Walsh wasn't done. He stepped back slightly, resting a hand on his belt. "Official business," he repeated mockingly. "With a case like that, looks more like you're hiding something. Mind if I take a look?" Harper's patience, though vast, was beginning to wear thin. "I do mind, Sergeant Walsh. That case contains classified materials, and you have no authority to inspect it without a federal warrant." The smirk vanished from Walsh's face, replaced by a scowl. "Classified, huh? That's convenient." He gestured toward the back seat with his flashlight. "Why don't you just open it up, and we'll see how classified it really is." Harper held the man's gaze, his expression firm. "I strongly advise you to reconsider, Sergeant." The warning in his voice was unmistakable, but Walsh either didn't notice or didn't care. Instead, he stepped back toward his cruiser, calling into his radio. Harper couldn't make out the exact words, but he knew enough to recognize the tone. Walsh wasn't calling for backup. He was calling to escalate. Sitting in the driver's seat, Harper exhaled slowly, his grip on the wheel tightening once more. This wasn't going to end with a simple warning. He could feel it in the air, thick with tension, hanging over the quiet stretch of road like a storm cloud waiting to break. The engine of Michael Harper's sedan hummed quietly, a stark contrast to the rising tension between him and the officer outside. Sergeant Bradley Walsh had returned to his cruiser after the initial confrontation, but his radio chatter and occasional glances toward Harper's vehicle made it clear he wasn't planning to let this go. Harper sat still, his fingers gripping the steering wheel, his gaze fixed forward. His thoughts ran in a controlled loop, assessing the situation. The case in the back seat was no ordinary piece of luggage. It contained sensitive materials tied to a high-stakes operation involving national security. The case was also equipped with multiple layers of protection, including a biometric lock and a defensive mechanism designed to prevent tampering. He had warned Walsh once, but the man's demeanor suggested he wasn't the type to listen. The harsh beam of a flashlight broke Harper's focus as Walsh approached the car again. The officer's steps were slow and deliberate, his boots crunching against the gravel shoulder of the road. This time, he stopped a few feet from the driver's side window, his hand resting conspicuously on the holster of his sidearm. "Step out of the vehicle," Walsh ordered, his tone flat but firm. Harper didn't move. His calm demeanor remained intact, but there was an edge to his voice when he replied, "Is there a reason for this request, Sergeant?" Walsh's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yeah, I've got a reason. That case in your back seat, it's suspicious. And so are you. Now step out of the car." Harper exhaled slowly through his nose, weighing his options. He didn't want to escalate the situation further, but the man's tone and body language made it clear he wouldn't be taking no for an answer. Reluctantly, Harper released his seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped out. The cold night air bit at his skin as he stood next to the car, towering slightly over Walsh. The sergeant took a step back, his flashlight sweeping over Harper's frame before settling on the case in the back seat. "Mind telling me again what's inside that thing?" Harper crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "As I've already explained, it's classified. I'm on official business, and you're interfering with a federal operation." Walsh let out a short, humorless laugh. "Official business? Out here in the middle of nowhere? You expect me to believe that?" "I expect you to do your job within the bounds of the law," Harper replied evenly. "You've seen my credentials. If you have doubts, you're welcome to contact the Bureau for verification." But Walsh wasn't interested in making calls. He pointed at the case with his flashlight, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "I'm not buying it. That case could have anything in it. Drugs, weapons, something dangerous. And I don't need your permission to check it out." "You do, actually," Harper said, his tone firm. "Federal property is protected under law. Tampering with it is a felony." The warning seemed to irritate Walsh further. His face darkened and his grip on the flashlight tightened. "Listen, buddy. You might think your fancy job title puts you above the law, but out here, I call the shots. That case is getting opened, one way or another." Harper's jaw tightened, but he didn't waver. "Sergeant, you're making a mistake." Walsh ignored him, stepping past Harper toward the back door of the sedan. Harper turned to follow, his voice cutting through the night like steel. "Don't touch it." Walsh froze for a moment, glancing back at Harper. There was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a defiant glare. "What are you going to do, arrest me?" "I don't need to," Harper replied, his tone measured but laced with authority. "That case is designed to handle intrusions on its own." The words hung in the air, but Walsh didn't heed them. Instead, he reached for the door handle and yanked it open. Harper took a step back, his posture tense but controlled. The sergeant leaned into the car, inspecting the sleek black case strapped securely to the seat. "What's so special about this thing, huh?" Walsh muttered to himself, running a hand along the case's surface. His fingers found the latch and he paused, glancing over his shoulder at Harper. Last chance to cooperate. Harper didn't respond. His silence was answer enough. With a sharp click, Walsh released the latch. The case let out a faint hiss as its defensive mechanism activated. A split second later, a high-pitched whine filled the air, followed by a powerful surge of electricity. Walsh let out a guttural yell as the current surged through his body, forcing him to drop the case and stumble backward. The shock knocked him off his feet, sending him sprawling onto the gravel. His flashlight clattered to the ground, its beam flickering wildly. Harper watched as Walsh writhed for a moment, his limbs jerking involuntarily before the shock subsided. A loud, piercing alarm began to sound from the case, its strobing red lights casting eerie shadows across the scene. Harper stepped back, pulling out his phone. His fingers moved swiftly as he dialed a secure line. "This is Director Harper," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "Security breach on Highway 84. Send immediate backup." As he ended the call, Harper glanced down at Walsh, who was struggling to sit up. The sergeant's face was pale and his breath came in ragged gasps. His uniform was disheveled, and there was a faint scorch mark on the sleeve of his jacket where the electricity had arced. You "You attacked me," Walsh stammered, his voice shaky but laced with anger. "This is assault." Harper's expression remained neutral as he pocketed his phone. "No, Sergeant. This is what happens when you ignore warnings and tamper with federal property." Walsh glared at him, his hands trembling as he tried to push himself to his feet. "You're gonna pay for this. You hear me? I'm gonna have your badge." Harper didn't respond. He simply crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering as the wail of distant sirens grew louder. The cavalry was on its way, and Walsh was about to learn just how badly he had miscalculated. The wail of the case's alarm pierced the night, echoing across the desolate highway like a siren of doom. The flashing red lights cast long, distorted shadows, making the entire scene feel surreal. Michael Harper stood a few paces away from his car, his phone still in his hand, his eyes fixed on Sergeant Bradley Walsh, who was now sitting on the ground, shaking off the after effects of the electric shock. Walsh's breaths were shallow and rapid as he leaned on one arm, his other hand clutching his chest. His face was contorted in a mix of pain, confusion, and fury. The sergeant's hat had fallen off, and his hair, slick with sweat, clung to his scalp. His flashlight lay a few feet away, its beam pointing uselessly into the dirt. "You think this is funny?" Walsh barked, his voice hoarse but dripping with venom. "You think you can assault a police officer and get away with it?" Harper tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "No one assaulted you, Sergeant. You tampered with a protected case, despite multiple warnings. The mechanism did exactly what it was designed to do: defend itself." Walsh staggered to his feet, his legs unsteady beneath him. He swayed for a moment, his face twisting in anger as he pointed a shaking finger at Harper. This is illegal. I'll have you in cuffs for this. You think your badge gives you the right to—" Harper cut him off, his voice cold and commanding. "Sergeant, I've had enough of your theatrics. You ignored my identification, violated federal property, and now you're attempting to shift the blame for your own recklessness. Stand down." Walsh's jaw clenched as he took a stumbling step forward. "Stand down? You're on my highway and you're under my authority. You're not above the law." Harper didn't move. His calm, imposing presence only seemed to infuriate Walsh further. The sergeant reached for his radio, fumbling as he tried to call for backup. "Officer down," he barked into the device, his voice crackling with desperation. "I need assistance immediately. Suspect is hostile. Possible assault with an unknown weapon." Harper let out a slow exhale, the faintest hint of frustration crossing his features. He knew Walsh's report would escalate the situation unnecessarily, but there was no point in trying to reason with the man any further. The damage had already been done, and the sirens growing louder in the distance signaled that reinforcements were on their way. The flashing red lights from the case continued to bathe the scene in an eerie glow. Harper turned toward the sedan and reached into his pocket, pulling out a slim device resembling a remote control. With a few presses of a button, the alarm ceased, leaving the highway in an almost oppressive silence. Walsh flinched at the sudden quiet, his hand hovering near the holster of his sidearm. "What the hell are you doing now?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Disabling the security system," Harper replied evenly, slipping the remote back into his pocket. "You've done enough damage for one night." Walsh's face turned red, his anger bubbling to the surface. "Damage? You're the one carrying some high-tech death trap in your car. What if that thing had killed me?" "It wouldn't have," Harper said bluntly. "The mechanism is non-lethal, designed to incapacitate intruders, not harm them. But I'm sure your superiors will be happy to explain that to you once they review the footage." Walsh froze, his eyes narrowing. Footage? Harper gestured toward the case. It records everything, every attempt to tamper with it, every unauthorized access, captured and securely stored. So, yes, Sergeant, there's footage of your actions tonight. I imagine it will make for an interesting conversation with your department. The sergeant's face paled slightly, but his stubbornness didn't waver. You think you're so clever, don't you? Waving your big-shot title around, acting like you're untouchable. Harper didn't respond immediately. Instead, he straightened his posture, his piercing gaze locked onto Walsh. I don't need to act, Sergeant. The law is on my side. You had every opportunity to handle this situation professionally, and you chose to let your biases dictate your actions. Now you'll face the consequences. Before Walsh could retort, the first of the reinforcements arrived. 2 black and white patrol cars pulled up, their lights cutting through the darkness. Doors opened, and 4 officers stepped out, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm as they took in the scene. Their sergeant disheveled and visibly shaken, a black sedan with an ominous glowing case in the back seat, and Michael Harper standing calmly with his arms crossed. One of the officers, a tall woman with sharp features and a commanding presence, approached cautiously. Her name tag read Lieutenant Ramirez. She took one look at Walsh and frowned. What the hell happened here? She asked, her voice clipped. Walsh pointed an accusatory finger at Harper. This guy assaulted me. That case in his car, it's some kind of weapon. That's enough, Sergeant. Harper interrupted, his tone firm but composed. Lieutenant, I'm Director Michael Harper of the FBI. Your sergeant stopped me without cause, ignored my identification, and tampered with federal property. Ramirez's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked her reaction, turning to Walsh. Is this true? Walsh stammered, his bravado faltering. I thought he was lying. His story didn't add up, and that case, it looked dangerous. Ramirez's frown deepened as she turned back to Harper. Director Harper, do you have identification on you? Harper reached into his jacket pocket and handed her his credentials. Ramirez examined them carefully, her brow furrowing as she processed the situation. She looked back at Walsh, her tone growing sharper. Sergeant, did you verify his ID before escalating this? Walsh opened his mouth, then closed it again, his silence speaking volumes. Ramirez let out a heavy sigh, her frustration evident. She returned Harper's credentials with a nod. My apologies, Director. We'll handle this. Harper inclined his head slightly, his expression neutral. See that you do, and make sure the footage from that case is preserved. It will corroborate everything I've said. Ramirez nodded again, motioning for one of the other officers to secure the scene. Walsh stood frozen, his face a mix of anger and humiliation as the reality of his situation began to sink in. The faint hum of approaching vehicles signaled the arrival of more FBI agents. Harper didn't need to turn to know his backup had arrived. The cavalry was here, and the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. The distant hum of engines grew louder, punctuated by the rhythmic strobe of blue and white lights that sliced through the night. The FBI convoy arrived with precision, their black SUVs moving in unison like a well-rehearsed military drill. As the vehicles slowed to a halt, their tires crunching on the gravel shoulder, the weight of their presence hung heavy in the air. Michael Harper stood motionless near his car, his arms crossed over his chest as he watched the scene unfold. Sergeant Bradley Walsh, still reeling from the events of the past few minutes, looked between the arriving agents and Harper with a mixture of confusion and apprehension. He was no longer the one in control, and he knew it. The doors of the SUVs opened almost simultaneously, and a group of agents emerged, each one dressed in tactical suits and armed with an air of authority. At the front of the group was Special Agent Naomi Grant, Harper's trusted second in command. She was a tall woman with a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor, her dark eyes scanning the scene with laser focus. "Director Harper," she called out as she approached, her tone professional but tinged with concern. "Are you all right, sir?" Harper gave a small nod, his expression as steady as ever. "I'm fine, Agent Grant. The situation, however, is far from resolved." Grant's gaze shifted to Walsh, who was now standing stiffly near his cruiser, his face pale but his posture defensive. The case, still strapped securely in the back seat of Harper's sedan, emitted a faint red glow from its deactivated security system. Grant's eyes narrowed as she pieced together the scene. "What happened here?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already had a good idea. Harper gestured toward Walsh with a tilt of his head. "Sergeant Walsh here decided to stop me without cause, ignore my credentials, and attempt to tamper with classified federal property. The case's defense mechanism activated as designed." Grant's expression hardened as she turned to Walsh, her hands resting on her hips. "Is that true, Sergeant?" Walsh bristled, his indignation bubbling to the surface despite the obvious power imbalance. "I was doing my job. That case looked suspicious, and I had every right to investigate." Grant raised an eyebrow, her voice laced with skepticism. "Every right? Did you verify the director's identification before taking matters into your own hands?" Walsh hesitated, the muscles in his jaw working as he searched for a response. I didn't think it was legitimate. He could have been anyone." "Anyone?" Grant repeated, her tone dripping with disbelief. "You think someone posing as the director of the FBI would be driving down an empty highway with a reinforced case strapped to the back seat? That's the logic you're going with?" The other officers, including Lieutenant Ramirez, stood nearby, watching the exchange in awkward silence. Ramirez shifted uncomfortably, clearly regretting her earlier deference to Walsh. Walsh straightened his back, doubling down despite the mounting evidence against him. "I had to make a call. It's my duty to protect this jurisdiction." Grant stepped closer, her eyes boring into Walsh's. "Your duty, Sergeant, is to follow protocol. Ignoring credentials and tampering with federal property is not protocol. It's a violation of federal law." Walsh opened his mouth to protest, but Grant cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Save it. There's nothing you can say that will justify your actions tonight." Harper watched the exchange in silence, his presence commanding even without speaking. He allowed Grant to take the lead, trusting her judgment to handle the situation appropriately. She had a knack for cutting through nonsense, and Walsh was no exception. One of the agents from the convoy approached Harper, his voice low but urgent. "Director, we've secured the area. Do you want us to retrieve the case?" Harper shook his head. "No need. It's secure where it is. Focus on documenting the scene and ensuring that all relevant footage is preserved. We'll need a full report by morning." The agent nodded and moved to relay the instructions to the rest of the team. Meanwhile, Grant turned back to Harper, her demeanor softening slightly as she addressed him directly. "Sir, do you want to press charges against the sergeant?" Harper considered the question for a moment, his gaze shifting briefly to Walsh, who was now looking anywhere but at him. The man's defiance had been replaced by a flicker of fear as the reality of his situation sank in. "No," Harper said finally, his voice measured. "That won't be necessary. His department will handle the disciplinary actions, and the footage from the case will speak for itself. Grant nodded, though her expression suggested she would have preferred a harsher course of action. Understood, sir. I'll ensure the footage is transferred to a secure server immediately. As the agents began to disperse and secure the scene, Ramirez stepped forward, clearly trying to salvage what was left of her department's dignity. Director Harper, she began, her tone apologetic, I want to personally apologize for what happened here tonight. This isn't how we operate. Harper regarded her for a moment, his expression unreadable. I appreciate that, Lieutenant. But actions speak louder than words. Make sure this doesn't happen again. Ramirez nodded, her face flushed with embarrassment. She turned to Walsh, who had finally gone silent, and gestured sharply toward the patrol car. Get in the car, Sergeant. We'll discuss this back at the station. Walsh hesitated, his face a mixture of anger and humiliation, but he ultimately obeyed, climbing into the cruiser without a word. Ramirez followed, and the vehicle pulled away, its lights flickering briefly before disappearing into the darkness. The highway was quiet once more, save for the low murmur of the FBI agents finishing their work. Harper stood by his car, the tension in his shoulders finally beginning to ease. Grant approached him again, her expression thoughtful. You handled that well, she said. Most people would have lost their temper. Harper allowed himself a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. I've had a lifetime of practice, Agent Grant. Situations like this are nothing new. Grant didn't reply, but the unspoken understanding between them was clear. They both knew the deeper implications of what had transpired tonight, the prejudices that fueled Walsh's actions, the systemic issues that allowed them to happen. As the last of the agents wrapped up their tasks, Harper climbed back into his car. The case in the back seat was silent now, its defenses reset, a testament to the resilience and foresight required in his line of work. The convoy began to move again, the SUVs forming a protective formation around Harper's sedan as they resumed their journey. The road stretched ahead, illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. Harper's hands tightened on the wheel as he drove forward, his mind already turning to the challenges that lay ahead. Tonight's ordeal was over, but the fight for justice was far from finished. By the time Michael Harper reached his destination, the events of the night had already begun to ripple outward. The FBI's secure servers were buzzing with activity as agents processed the footage from the case's defense system and prepared their reports. The pristine conference room where Harper arrived shortly after was calm, but beneath the surface it was clear that the incident on Highway 84 was quickly becoming a matter of serious concern. Harper entered the room, his movements deliberate as he set the case on the long, polished table. Around him sat members of his senior staff, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and quiet apprehension. Special Agent Grant stood at the head of the table, a tablet in her hand, her sharp eyes scanning the gathered team. Director, she began, her voice steady but firm, the preliminary review of the footage is complete. It's damning, to say the least. Harper gave a single nod, his face betraying no emotion. Let's hear it. Grant swiped on her tablet, and the large monitor at the end of the room flickered to life. The video began to play, showing the scene from the perspective of the case's embedded camera. The group watched as Sergeant Walsh approached the vehicle, his flashlight bouncing erratically as he leaned into the car. The audio was crystal clear, capturing every word exchanged. Walsh's dismissive tone, his refusal to verify Harper's credentials, and, finally, his brazen attempt to open the case, all of it unfolded on the screen. When the defense system activated, sending Walsh sprawling, the room fell silent save for the hum of the monitor. As the video ended, Grant turned to Harper, her expression grim. "This footage is already being reviewed by our legal team. It's enough to justify a formal complaint against the department." Harper leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. "What's the current status of Sergeant Walsh?" Grant tapped her tablet. "He's been suspended pending an internal investigation. His superiors at the local department are scrambling to contain the fallout, but the footage has already been leaked to social media." Harper arched an eyebrow. "Leaked?" Grant nodded. "One of the officers on the scene, Ramirez, I believe, mentioned that someone in the crowd recorded parts of the incident on their phone. The video is trending online as we speak." The room was heavy with the weight of the revelation. Harper wasn't surprised. He had long accepted the reality of living in an age where nothing stayed private for long. Still, the speed with which the incident had gone viral was staggering. Grant continued, her tone growing more cautious. "Public opinion is not favorable. The hashtags trending right now are #JusticeForHarper and #BiasInBlue. There's significant outrage over the racial undertones of Walsh's behavior." Harper's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained composed. "And the department's response?" Grant glanced at her notes. "They've issued a preliminary statement acknowledging the incident but have yet to address the specifics. There's a lot of pressure for them to act decisively, especially given your position." Harper let out a slow breath, his gaze drifting toward the monitor, which now displayed a paused frame of Walsh's panicked face. The weight of the situation pressed against him, not because he felt personally wronged, but because he understood the broader implications. "This isn't just about me," he said finally, his voice steady but resolute. "It's about accountability, about ensuring that no one else has to endure what I did tonight." The room nodded in agreement, the unspoken tension of shared understanding passing through the team. They knew the challenges ahead weren't just about addressing this one incident, but tackling the systemic issues it represented. Grant cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "Director, how do you want us to proceed? The public is waiting for a response, and we need to be strategic about our next steps." Harper straightened in his seat, his focus sharpening. "Issue a statement emphasizing our commitment to transparency and accountability. Make it clear that this behavior will not be tolerated no matter who it's directed at, and ensure that Walsh faces the consequences of his actions." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "But let's not lose sight of the larger picture. Use this opportunity to reinforce our training programs, particularly those focused on unconscious bias and de-escalation. This can't just be about punishing one man. It has to be about preventing this from happening again." The room murmured in agreement, the tension easing slightly as the path forward became clearer. Harper stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Grant, keep me updated on the investigation and the department's response. I want a full briefing by tomorrow morning." "Yes, sir," Grant replied, her tone resolute. As the team dispersed, Harper lingered for a moment, his thoughts heavy. The case sat on the table before him, a silent reminder of the night's events. He reached for it, his fingers brushing the smooth surface as a flicker of exhaustion crossed his features. Leaving the conference room, Harper made his way to his office, where the dim light of his desk lamp cast a soft glow over the space. He sat down heavily, his gaze drifting to the window. The city skyline stretched out before him, a sea of lights that seemed both distant and overwhelming. His phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him from his thoughts. Picking it up, he saw a notification from a trusted colleague. It was a link to one of the viral videos, now accompanied by headlines dissecting every moment of the encounter. Harper watched the video in silence, his expression unreadable. The comments below were a mixture of outrage and support, with voices from across the spectrum weighing in. He knew this wasn't the first time such an incident had captured public attention, nor would it be the last. But as he set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, Harper felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just another media storm. It was a moment that could spark real change, and he intended to see it through. The morning sunlight poured into Michael Harper's office, casting long shadows across the room as he sat behind his desk, reviewing the latest updates from the night's events. The air was thick with the weight of the past 24 hours, but Harper's expression remained calm, his focus unwavering. Stacks of documents lay neatly arranged on his desk alongside the now infamous black case, its surface gleaming under the warm light. The events on Highway 84 had escalated into a national conversation overnight, and Harper could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. He wasn't one to shy away from pressure. His decades of service had taught him how to thrive under it, but this felt different. This wasn't just about him. It was about something much larger. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Picking it up, he saw the name of Special Agent Naomi Grant on the screen. He answered immediately. "Grant," he said, his tone brisk. "Director," Grant replied, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of urgency. "I've compiled the final report on Sergeant Walsh's actions, along with the public response. Do you want me to summarize?" "No need," Harper replied. "I've read the drafts. What's the latest from the department?" Grant hesitated for a moment. "The local department issued a formal apology this morning. They've placed Walsh on indefinite suspension and initiated an internal review. The chief has also reached out personally to offer his assurances that this won't happen again." Harper's lips pressed into a thin line. "Words are easy. Actions are what matter." Grant's tone softened. "I agree, sir. But the public seems to be rallying behind you. The hashtags are still trending, and several prominent figures have spoken out in your support. This could be a moment to push for meaningful change." Harper leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he considered her words. "That's exactly what I intend to do." He ended the call and set the phone down, his gaze drifting to the case on his desk. Its presence felt symbolic now, a reminder of the challenges he'd faced and the opportunities that had come from them. Standing, he straightened his jacket and made his way to the conference room where a press briefing had been arranged. The room was already filled with journalists, their cameras and microphones pointed at the podium. Harper's arrival sent a ripple through the crowd, their chatter subsiding as he stepped up to address them. The air was electric with anticipation. "Good morning," Harper began, his voice resonating with authority. "As many of you are aware, an incident occurred last night that has sparked significant discussion across the country. I stand before you not just as the director of the FBI, but as a citizen who believes in accountability, fairness, and justice." He paused, letting his words settle before continuing. "What happened on that highway was unacceptable. It was a stark reminder that we still have work to do to address the biases that undermine our institutions and erode public trust. But let me be clear, this isn't about one officer or one department. This is about a system that must do better." Harper's gaze swept over the room, meeting the eyes of the journalists and cameras alike. The events of last night are being thoroughly investigated and appropriate action will be taken. But more importantly, this is an opportunity for all of us, law enforcement, government, and citizens, to reflect on how we can create a system that serves everyone equally. The room buzzed with the sound of pens scribbling and cameras clicking, but Harper pressed on, his tone steady. As director of the FBI, I am committed to leading by example. We will be implementing additional training programs to address unconscious bias, enhancing accountability measures, and working closely with local departments to ensure that incidents like this are prevented in the future. His words carried weight, each one landing with precision. He knew this wasn't just about appeasing the public. It was about setting a standard, about showing that even the most powerful institutions could be held accountable. In closing, Harper said, his voice softening slightly, I want to thank those who have supported this call for change. Your voices matter. Together, we can build a system that reflects the values we hold dear: respect, fairness, and justice for all. The room erupted into applause, a rare moment of unity in a space often defined by division. Harper stepped away from the podium, his expression calm but resolute as he exited the room. Back in his office, Harper sank into his chair, feeling a rare moment of exhaustion wash over him. His gaze settled once more on the case, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't just a tool of security. It was a symbol of resilience, of the fight for justice. As he leaned back, his phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from social media. He opened it to find a video clip from the press conference, accompanied by a flood of supportive comments. Among them, one stood out. Change starts with accountability. Thank you, Director Harper, for showing us what leadership looks like. Harper placed the phone down, his smile fading into a thoughtful expression. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope. The system wasn't perfect, it might never be, but moments like this reminded him why he'd chosen this path. It wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about making the law work for everyone. As the city buzzed with the energy of a new day, Harper allowed himself a rare moment of quiet reflection. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't walk it alone. Justice, after all, was a collective effort, and he was ready to lead the charge. As the night deepened, Harper leaned back in his chair, a faint smile crossing his lips. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but he wasn't walking it alone. Justice, after all, wasn't a destination. It was a journey, and he was ready to see it through. Thank you for watching the rest of the story. If you liked it, subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Share this video with your friends and leave your comments. Your opinion is important to us. And don't forget to visit our channel to see other interesting stories. See you in the next video.